61 most hated things in Destiny history. There are things like the infamous one-eyed mask, broken sticky grenades from Destiny 1, and of course, Gambit. Back in the early days of Destiny 1, legendary engrams could turn into blues when you decrypted them. Exotic engrams could also give you armor for classes that you didn't even play. Destiny 2 launched with a truly awful shader system. Shaders could only be used once, they overflowed your inventory, and they could only be dismantled individually. Most people agree that we basically got a downgraded tower in Destiny 2 compared to Destiny 1. And also, why have we been rebuilding it for like 5 years? Curse of Osiris is widely regarded as the worst Destiny expansion in history. It added very little to the game and addressed almost none of the complaints people had at the time. Melee registration is a serious issue that's been around since the beginning of Destiny 1 and it has never even been addressed. It feels like at least 10% of the time you try to use your melee, it will simply miss and players are understandably quite frustrated. Pre-nerf Skolas was a brutally difficult boss fight in early Destiny 1 and people hated how powerful he was. Players would get completely surrounded by enemies that would kill in one hit. A huge number of Destiny players consider themselves solo players, and yet Destiny continues to have very little support for them. LFG is literally just an inconvenient version of matchmaking, so why don't we just add a matchmaking option to the actual activities in the game? Speaking of LFG, people hate when fellow Guardians make elitist LFG posts with ridiculous requirements, like, Iron Banner, have a 3 KD or we'll kick you. Out of curiosity, I decided to investigate this particular fellow and discovered that he only has a 1 KD. I guess he's gonna have to kick himself for not meeting his own requirements. Back in the beginning of Destiny 1, players needed to manually farm planetary materials for endless hours if they wanted to upgrade their loot. The only way to make progress was to mindlessly run around planets harvesting stuff, and it was perhaps the most monotonous Destiny grind we've ever seen. Applying weapon and armor mods used to cost a bit too much glimmer, and this was extremely annoying because players would often run out of glimmer simply by switching up their loadout too frequently. When Stasis first arrived in Destiny 2, it was so ridiculously overtuned that it was impossible to beat. Shadow Dive in particular was so hated, partially because it was still OP an entire year after it came out, and that actually leads us to the next thing. It's extremely frustrating when balance updates take centuries to go into effect. Fortunately, Bungie has gotten a lot faster with their updates over time, but stale sandboxes are still a big problem when something is OP for months on end. There's nothing more surprising than just mysteriously dying for no apparent reason and then being told you were killed by the architects. Although it is sometimes hilarious, dying to Destiny physics can be rather annoying. Of course, this is a subjective one, but there are some PvP maps that almost everyone just seems to despise. Convergence, Twilight Gap, and Exodus Blue are among the most hated PvP maps in the game. I guess this leads us to the next thing everyone hates, playing on bad PvP maps. Maybe someday we'll get a map voting system so that we can at least mitigate the amount of time that we spend on our least favorite maps. Champions were first introduced into Destiny 2 as a way to add difficulty and complexity to endgame PvE content, but they have since become generally disliked by the Destiny player base. Champions sometimes feel like a monotonous and artificial difficulty increase, and since they force you to use certain weapons in order to defeat them, they really restrict player build crafting and identity. Class items in Destiny are a great way to proudly represent your class of choice, but since class items don't have stats, it's literally pointless to receive more than one of them. For this reason, people hate when their loot is a completely worthless class item that they already have. Paul Tassi and a lot of other people would like to drop the 2 from the name Destiny 2. It would certainly be convenient for nice-looking YouTube and Forbes titles, but I'm guessing it would be a fairly complicated thing to do on Bungie's end. Destiny 2 launched with only static weapon rolls. This was a huge downgrade from Destiny 1 because once you acquired a weapon, there was no reason to grind for a better version since they were all identical. Over the years, we've had many instances of something getting nerfed into the ground in PvE due to Crucible-related issues. However, Bungie has gotten a lot better at separating the PvP and PvE sandboxes, and nowadays they're almost completely independent. Platform-exclusive content was an unfortunate reality during Destiny 1. Much to the dismay of Xbox players, there were some strikes, PvP maps, and even weapons that were only available on PlayStation. The in-game UI doesn't properly explain many of the perks and stats, and this can be rather confusing for new players. Fortunately, Bungie is introducing more in-game stats and explanations, but for all of D1 and most of D2, many players have been left in the dark. Back in the day, Eververse didn't have duplicate protection, so people would spend their hard-earned money just to get something that they already had. When I asked what you guys want to delete from Destiny 2, a concerning amount of you said you want to delete the entire game. Are you guys doing okay over there? Whenever you go into your inventory to change your mods, you have to navigate through several pages of mods just to find the one that you want. Why can't we just have them all on one page, or perhaps gain the ability to mark mods as favorites? Destiny has experienced a lot of performance issues over the years that have led to error codes, lag, and extreme decreases in frame rates. More recently and memorably, we had an issue where everyone got like 10 FPS whenever they opened their menus, and it felt awful. Insanely overpowered exotic armor has been a near constant source of frustration for Destiny players ever since the game was released. In Destiny 2, we've had stuff like the One-Eyed Mask giving wall hacks and seemingly infinite HP, Renewal Grasp making Guardians invincible, Lordly Splendor giving an absurd amount of free extra damage, Wormhusk replenishing way too much health, and a whole host of exotics like Geomag Stabilizers allowing Guardians to get their supers far too often. Awesome exotics are one of the best parts about Destiny build crafting, but historically broken exotics definitely deserve the negative attention they've received. You know when you're about to fire off that perfectly aimed shot, but then you just get wildly flinched way off target? Yeah, it's not exactly a fun interaction, even though it may be necessary. Destiny's new and returning player experience really sucks. The game is very complicated, and yet almost nothing is explained to new players. Instead, they're forced to play the most boring things Destiny has to offer during the starting missions, and then the story and characters like Cayde are all confusing because stuff like Cayde's death was literally removed from the game. This leads us to Destiny's removal of content and sunsetting. Removing content that everyone paid for and also sunsetting fan-favorite weapons understandably upset quite a lot of people. Vaulting does have good consequences like reducing the game's file size and making it easier to do updates and patches, but there's no denying that the overall announcements of vaulting and sunsetting triggered overwhelmingly negative reactions from the Destiny community. I don't think we've ever had an NPC as annoying as Hawthorne and her speech about how we took out Gaul and woke up the Traveler. Pre-nerf Valis to Arc was a Destiny 1 strike boss who had a bit too much health. He wasn't particularly difficult to defeat, but he was a notoriously tanky bullet sponge. Bungie once promised a renewed PvP focus, but several years later, this has yet to come to fruition. PvP gets balancing updates and occasional changes to Trials and Iron Banner, but Crucible enthusiasts still feel extraordinarily neglected when it comes to new updates and content. Once you create your Guardian in Destiny 2, you're stuck with that race, gender, and appearance forever, unless you want to completely delete your character and start over. Adding customization would be awesome. Nobody enjoys losing in a video game, but it's extra demoralizing when you can tell that the opposing player is using illegal hardware or software to gain an unfair advantage. Cheaters do nothing but degrade the experience of other Guardians, and they're understandably despised by the entire community. One of the most frustrating things about power leveling is when you just need that one specific slot to reach the next level, but then the game proceeds to give you 15 of the same slot in a row. I agree with Cool Guy that some of the jumping puzzles are not as valuable as real encounters, and they're just a bit boring, especially after your first run. Deepstone Crypt is definitely an exception, though. Leveling system issues have plagued Destiny since 2014. Nowadays, one of the main gripes many players have is that when new content drops, you still need to grind boring old content in order to level up. When there's an exciting new campaign and new weapons and new activities, nobody wants to go play 3 games of Gambit. Speaking of which, Gambit is the most disliked core activity that Bungie has ever made. A lot of people thought it was cool when it was first introduced, but certain issues like constant invasions from people with full heavy ammo has significantly degraded Gambit's reputation. The forklift was an infamous obstacle in the Sparrow Racing League that everybody crashed into. During Destiny 1 and the first few years of Destiny 2, people would frequently use emotes or sword hilts in order to activate the third-person camera mode. Nobody enjoyed playing against people who were doing this because it let them see around corners without ever exposing their bodies, slowing the pace of the game down to a crawl. Nowadays, almost every game that has PvP runs on dedicated servers, but not Destiny. Bungie has made improvements to the server technology since Destiny 1, but the game still runs on a hybrid client server and peer-to-peer technology, which leads to a whole lot of issues, including extreme lag and a vulnerability to cheaters. Public events themselves aren't exactly anyone's favorite activity, but perhaps the worst part about them is that they give almost no loot. You might remember this clip of Bungie calling 2 tokens and a blue the, quote, most rewarding public event.
I promised before that this was the most rewarding public event.
Over the years, I've noticed a pattern. People hate knowing that they're about to die when they can't do anything about it. This is why stuff like the pre-nerf D1 Thorn, Le Monarch, grenade launchers, Jotun, handheld supernova, and anything that burns you to death are among the most hated things in PvP history. One of the best experiences Destiny has to offer is playing a fresh new expansion with new enemies and using new weapons and gear to take them out. This is precisely why it feels rather disappointing when the new content is actually just recycled or revamped versions of old content. Recycled content is certainly better than no content, but fighting the same enemies we've been fighting since 2014 can get a little monotonous for veteran players. We went nearly 1,000 days without a new PvP map before one was finally introduced in Season 17. This was pretty bad, and this clip from Destiny 1 didn't age so well.
We have new maps. We always have new maps.
Destiny 2 launched with the notorious token system, where players would grind and save up hundreds of tokens before turning them into various vendors to get mediocre RNG loot. One of the worst memories many players have from Destiny 1 is fighting against players who are using the memory of Scory. This artifact would let players recharge their supers absurdly fast if they camped together in the back of the map, and it led to the most egregious super spam we've ever seen. Bungie's PvP matchmaking settings are an eternally hot topic within the community, but I think something everyone can agree on is that laggy and teleporting guardians are never a good thing. One of the worst Destiny 1 metas happened right after they severely reduced the amount of special ammo in PvP. This paved the way for aimbot one-shot sticky grenades, sidearms, and icebreaker to rule the Crucible. Speaking of ammo, Destiny 2 launched with the worst weapon and ammo economy system we have ever seen. We had 2 primaries, no special, and 1 power weapon. I have heard a few people say they liked this system, but it was overwhelmingly disliked by the community and unfortunately caused a lot of people to leave the game. Ghost bullets, the phenomenon where bullets seemingly disappear into thin air. To my fellow controller players out there, have you ever been aiming on a target and then have something run in front of you and completely screw up your aim assist? Even though it exists for a good reason, people hate the limit that has been placed on vault space. Since every season and expansion comes with new loot, people are understandably running out of space to store their items. Every hunter main knows that Dragon Shadow is an amazing exotic, but it just looks like absolute trash. It doesn't truly fit with any other armor in the game, and its ornament barely changes its appearance. Bungie will make $1 million in Eververse sales if they just add a good-looking ornament for this exotic. Lack of loot in PvP has been a recurring issue throughout Destiny's lifespan. There were times when pinnacle weapons were really desirable, but other than that, there isn't really enough incentive and loot behind PvP modes. This next hated thing let people generate truly infinite orbs of power. But first, this video is sponsored by Skillshare, an online learning community where you can explore new skills, get inspired, and take the next step in your creative journey. Skillshare features thousands of classes where you can learn almost anything. Whether you'd like to enhance your day-to-day productivity or even learn how to become a YouTuber, Skillshare has classes that will interest you. I just finished this class from MKBHD and learned how to make better YouTube videos. And since this is now my full-time job, I've gained a lot of value from the classes covering social media, storytelling, and video editing. I like Skillshare because it's the perfect platform for exploring your interests. There are no ads, new premium classes are launched every week, and they even have subtitles in other languages like Spanish, French, Portuguese, and German. The first 1,000 people to use my code ShadowDestiny or the link in the description will get their first month completely free. So definitely join today, and thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. This final hated thing in Destiny was an exploit that let Titans make infinite orbs of power. But if you want to learn about that, watch this video about the 43 most broken glitches in Destiny history. We just covered the 61 most hated things in Destiny history. Subscribe!